Today, if you walk down Electric Road in Hong Kong, you are probably, you're dodging commuters, checking your phone, and grabbing a coffee on your way to work.
Right, just doing the normal daily grind.
Exactly. But if you rewind the clock just a few decades, standing in that exact same spot means you are in the middle of a desperate, bloody shootout led by a makeshift army of 60-year-old corporate CEOs.
It is a staggering contrast. I mean, we navigate our cities based on the present moment, right?
Yeah.
We're completely oblivious to the layers of history buried right beneath our shoes.
Yeah, totally. And that is why today we're going to completely break your mental map. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We have a massive stack of historical research with us today, and our mission is to prove that one incredibly dense slice of Hong Kong, the Fortress Hill and North Point district, isn't just your standard residential or, transit hub.
Oh, not at all. It is a compressed, three-dimensional chronicle of empire, war, elite social clubs, and dramatic immigrant struggles.
It's just wild.
It's like an urban double exposure photograph.
Right.
If you know how to look, you can see the ghosts of a 19th-century fortress, an exclusive European yacht club, and a major Cold War cultural frontier just bleeding right through the modern concrete.
Which is crazy because thousands of commuters pass through this area every single day, completely unaware of the invisible history they're walking through.
Yeah, they have no idea.
So by the end of this deep dive, you, our listener, are going to have a mental treasure map of hidden historical gems hiding in plain sight. Let's start by looking at how the very bedrock of this neighborhood shifted from a military frontier to an industrial heart.
Right, the shifting bedrock.
And that starts with a question that feels so obvious it almost sounds silly. Why is Fortress Hill called Fortress Hill?
It's the perfect place to start, honestly, because if you look around today, there is absolutely no fortress to be seen. You just see high-rises and traffic.
And nothing military at all.
Exactly. To find the fortress, we have to wind the clock all the way back to the mid-19th century. The British had established colonial rule in Hong Kong, and defending Victoria City, which was the main urban settlement at the time, was their absolute top priority.
Right.
The area between Causeway Bay and North Point was this rugged, peripheral eastern edge, known simply as East Hill. Strategically, it was the throat of Victoria Harbor.
So in 1879, the British military decides they need to lock down that throat. They set up the North Point Battery right on that hill.
Yeah, right up there.
And we aren't talking about a couple of wooden barricades and some guys with muskets, right? This was a major, heavily fortified installation designed to guard the entire eastern flank of the Empire's prize jewel.
But it did not exactly go smoothly.
Not at all.
The construction was completely at the mercy of the elements. The historical records from June 1878 paint a really vivid picture of a massive, severe storm that completely devastated the ongoing earthwork.
Just wiped them out.
Oh yeah, imagine the sheer volume of water turning the hillside into a mudslide. It was so intense that the earth gave way, and a massive multi-ton cannon actually slid right down the muddy bank.
Okay, that is an incredible visual. Just a colossal piece of military hardware surfing a mudslide into the harbor.
It's just gone.
But they dragged it back up, and over the next 40 years, the fort evolved. They started with these massive, clunky, muzzle-loading guns, the kind where you have to physically ram the gunpowder and the cannonball down the front of the barrel.
Which is slow and incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, super slow.
Yeah.
By the early 1900s, they had upgraded the battery to much faster, far more precise breech-loading guns, where you load the ammunition into the back.
They kept modernizing the technology, but here's the twist. By 1922, they dismantled the whole thing.
Wait, really?
Yeah. They handed the land back to the civilian government without ever really fighting a massive naval battle from that hill.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. The military spends 40 years building this fortress, dragging cannons through the mud, constantly upgrading the weapons, and then they just abandon it.
Pretty much.
Why walk away from a perfectly good, modernized coastal battery?
Well, because the entire philosophy of warfare changed. Initially, the British focused heavily on port defense, which literally meant guarding the immediate harbor water.
Right, defending the shoreline.
Exactly. But as military technology advanced, and as they leased the new territories, their concept of defensive depth expanded. They realized that waiting for enemy warships to reach the harbor was just a terrible strategy.
Too close for comfort.
Way too close.
Yeah.
So they moved their defensive lines much further out to the north.
Right, the gin drinkers line.
Exactly. For those who might not know, the Gin Drinkers line was essentially Hong Kong's version of the Maginot Line, a massive series of defensive bunkers and trenches spread across the hills of the new territory.
Got it.
Once they built that outer shield, the North Point Battery, sitting right on the harbor, became completely obsolete. And at the same time, the colonial government was desperate for land to accommodate a booming population and expanding industry.
So they happily reclaimed the hill for urban development.
Yep, they just bulldozed over the military history.
And this brings us to your first hidden gem. The next time you are in the Fortress Hill area, you won't see the cannons, but the geography is still there.
It really is.
The fort mostly sat where the Fortress Hill Methodist Secondary School is today. But if you walk right next to that school, you'll find a street called Fort Street, or Akala. It's not just a cute name, right?
No, it is the exact physical echo of the old pathway that led to the battery entrance. When you walk up that incline, you are quite literally walking the exact path of 19th-century artillerymen.
That's so cool. But the irony of this geography is that while the actual battery was dismantled without ever seeing a war, the neighborhood of North Point absolutely did see brutal combat just a couple of decades later.
It did. Fast forward to December 1941. The Japanese invade Hong Kong. And that massive gin drinkers line we just talked about
Yeah, the impenetrable shield.
falls shockingly fast. Suddenly, North Point is no longer the safe rear echelon. It is the absolute bleeding edge of the front line.
Wow.
And the key strategic asset here isn't a fort anymore. It's the North Point Power Station. It is the absolute lifeblood of the island's electricity. If it falls, the island goes dark.
And the people defending it, they were a unit known as the Hughesiliers.
Yes,
Ah.
the Hughesiliers. This was a troop made up almost entirely of expatriates over the age of 55.
Over 55.
Yes. We are talking about prominent businessmen, corporate executives, accountants, senior professionals.
Wow.
Many of them had fought in the First World War or the Boer War, so they had combat experience, but they were, long past the typical fighting age. Their leader was Major John Johnston Patterson, who was literally a tycoon from the Jardine Matheson trading house.
Okay, it sounds like an over-the-hill Avengers squad of corporate CEOs.
That's exactly what it was.
Just a bunch of guys who usually spend their afternoons in boardrooms suddenly strapping on helmets and picking up rifles. But I have to ask, militarily, wasn't it a massive tactical error to put a bunch of aging businessmen on the front line against a highly trained, fast-moving, invading army?
Well, it wasn't a choice. It was an act of absolute desperation. The regular British and colonial troops were stretched incredibly thin across the island.
Oh, I see.
So when the Japanese forces landed on the north shore under the cover of darkness on the night of December 18th, they quickly surrounded the power station. But what is truly remarkable is that these executives didn't just fold.
They fought back.
They fought fiercely. Major Patterson even authorized a small detachment that managed to push out and blow up a Japanese artillery position right on Fortress Hill Road.
No way. They held out against impossible odds.
They really did. They fought until the main power station building literally caught fire, their ammunition completely ran out, and they were finally forced to surrender on Electric Road.
That is just intense. And several highly prominent figures died in that battle, right? Like the chairman of the jockey club, Mr. Pierce.
Yes, he died in action.
And the manager of the power station, Vincent Sorby, he survived the shootout but later died in a POW camp.
Which is incredibly tragic. But this specific battle completely upends the way historians usually view colonial history.
How so?
Well, there is a very persistent, widespread myth that colonial elites simply fled at the first line of danger, just abandoning the local population to save themselves.
Right, the stereotype of the coward colonialist.
Exactly. But the stand of the Hughesiliers proves otherwise. These men, despite their immense wealth, privilege, and age, they stayed. They bought crucial hours for the main British forces to reorganize their defenses further south. They fought and died for a city they considered their second home.
It completely reframes the space for you. Today, that power station is long gone. It was torn down and replaced by the City Garden private housing estate. But if you look at the street signs around the estate, you will see Electric Road and Power Street. They sound like generic, modern, urban planning names, but they are actually silent, permanent memorials to an incredibly bloody 1941 battlefield.
It's a perfect example of how the literal ground beneath our feet shifts in its purpose. The military shifted out, industry shifted in, which actually brings us to another massive shift in this exact same neighborhood.
Oh, this part is wild to me.
Yeah, it's not just a military or industrial shift, but a literal physical shifting of the coastline itself.
Right. So if you are standing on Oil Street today, you're surrounded by massive high-rises, dense traffic, and concrete. But in 1908, the harbor water came right up to the edge of the street.
Yes, right to the street.
And taking prime advantage of that gorgeous waterfront was the brand new headquarters of the Royal Hong Kong Yacht Club.
Opened by Governor Frederick Lugard himself, this was an incredibly exclusive space. It was the absolute domain of European elites, wealthy merchants, and legislators. The architecture was deliberately designed to reflect that exclusivity.
The research details this architecture, and it's fascinating because it looks so out of place. It's an arts and crafts style building, red brick, rough stucco, highly distinct chimneys, and wide, breezy verandas.
Exactly. It was designed to mimic the grand leisure spaces of the British homeland, kind of creating a bubble of familiarity for the colonists.
A little slice of England.
Exactly. The ground floor housed the boat storage and a gym, and the first floor was essentially a massive salon. Gentlemen could sip drinks on those wide verandas and look out over the pristine, calm waters of Victoria Harbor after a day of sailing.
It represented a complete and total spatial monopoly by the elite. I mean, they owned the best view in the city.
They absolutely did.
But then the 1930s roll around, the city's population is growing, and Hong Kong desperately needs to expand its industrial and warehousing capacity. So what does the government do?
They physically moved the coastline.
They start a massive reclamation project, dumping thousands of tons of earth into the harbor, pushing the land way out into the water. If you've ever been frustrated by your city, tearing down a beloved local park or a historic spot to build a highway or a condo block, you are watching the exact same forces at play here.
Yeah, urban development is ruthless.
It's like buying an exclusive beachfront mansion, and then the city decides to build a massive highway and 10 blocks of concrete warehouses right in front of your living room window.
Precisely. The water was pushed away, and the yacht club was suddenly landlocked.
Yeah.
And the mechanism of this change is what historians call a functional retreat.
A functional retreat.
Right. We often assume that the colonial government existed solely to pamper its elites.
Yeah.
But this reclamation project proves that wasn't always true. When forced to choose between preserving the absolute spatial privileges of the yacht club and the broader, necessary economic expansion of the city's industrial base, the government chose industry.
Wow. So the elite were quite literally evicted by progress.
They were. The yacht club lost its coveted water access and was forced to pack up and move to Kellett Island in 1938.
And the beautiful red brick building, it was downgraded. It became a government supplies warehouse for decades. But here is the hidden gem for you today. That exact same arts and crafts building survived the wrecking ball.
It did.
It is now called OI, which is a super hip, grade 2 historic art space.
And just to clarify for our international listeners, a grade 2 historic building in Hong Kong means it is officially recognized as a building of special merit that should be selectively preserved. In a city notorious for aggressively tearing down the old to build the new, its survival is a minor miracle.
It really is. So when you visit OI, don't just look at the contemporary art on the walls. Pay close attention to the building's elevation and its position relative to the rest of the neighborhood.
Yes, look at the layout.
It is the absolute only building in the area perfectly preserved on the original pre-1930s coastline. When you stand in its courtyard, you have to mentally erase all the modern buildings between you and the harbor and imagine the waves lapping right up to the brickwork.
It's a mind-bending spatial exercise. The coastline moves outward, the factories move in, and then, in the years following World War II, the actual demographics of the people moving into this newly industrialized neighborhood completely transform.
Right. Industry brings jobs, but the war brought refugees. After World War II, and particularly as the Civil War raged across mainland China, Hong Kong saw a massive influx of immigrants.
A huge wave.
In the late 1940s and 50s, a huge number of wealthy, culturally sophisticated immigrants from Shanghai and the Zhejiang province settled right here in North Point. The area quickly became known as Little Shanghai.
And with that influx of wealth and that specific demographic came a massive demand for culture and entertainment, which introduces us to one of the most fascinating characters in this entire deep dive, Harry Odell.
Oh, I love this guy. Harry Odell's biography sounds like a Hollywood script that a studio would reject for being too unbelievable.
Totally.
He was a Jewish-Russian immigrant, originally named Harry Obadovsky. He had been a tap dancer, and he was actually a veteran of the exact same 1941 defense of Hong Kong we talked about earlier.
Wait, really? The same battle?
Yeah, the exact same one. He was injured in combat, became a prisoner of war, survived the camps, and in the post-war era, he looked at this booming, chaotic city full of refugees and immigrants and decided that what it really needed was world-class art.
He was a true visionary.
Yeah.
In 1952, Odell builds the Empire Theater in North Point, which later becomes the legendary State Theater.
Right.
And you have to remember, the famous Hong Kong City Hall, the official center of culture, wasn't built until 1962. So for an entire decade, Odell's privately funded theater was effectively the folk city hall.
Yeah.
It was the cultural epicenter of the entire city.
And he didn't just screen local movies, right? He brought in absolute international legends. We are talking Isaac Stern, the world-renowned violinist, Helen Traubel, the top soprano from the New York Metropolitan Opera,
Incredible names.
Larry Adler, the legendary harmonica player, who, by the way, directly inspired James Wong, who went on to become one of the founding fathers of Hong Kong pop culture. Odell essentially put a refugee city on the global classical music map during the height of the Cold War.
But his business partners thought he was absolutely insane.
Oh, I bet.
They thought his idealism was going to bankrupt them. I mean, bringing a New York opera singer across the globe to a city bursting with refugees just trying to survive was a massive financial risk. So to make it work, Odell had to invent a brilliant financial engine.
Wait, looking at the research here, he was essentially running a 1950s Netflix.
A Netflix. How so?
Like, think about how modern streaming services fund their weird, niche, award-winning indie movies by using the massive profits from their giant commercial blockbusters. Odell did the exact same thing.
Oh, I see what you mean.
He used the steady, massive commercial revenue from screening popular Western and Mandarin movies to completely subsidize the massive financial losses he took on bringing in prestige, international classical musicians.
That is the perfect analogy. The mass market funded the high culture. And the reason he fought so hard to do this was because Odell deeply believed in the power of giving people the absolute best art possible, regardless of their circumstances.
He wanted to elevate the city.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He saw Hong Kong not just as a temporary refugee camp, but as a free port of ideas. In a world deeply divided by the Iron Curtain and Cold War paranoia, he used his private passion and clever business model to build a towering cultural bridge.
That's beautiful.
He proved that high culture wasn't just a luxury for stable times. It was a necessary anchor for a community trying to figure out its new identity.
It's an incredibly beautiful legacy, and that physical anchor is still there. The State Theater is currently undergoing conservation as a Grade I historic building.
Which is a big deal.
Oh, Grade III is the real deal. It means it has outstanding merit, and every effort must be made to preserve it. So, next time you are walking down King's Road, I want you to look up. You literally cannot miss it.
It's so distinctive.
You will see these globally unique, exposed, parabolic concrete roof arches holding up the building like a giant rib cage. And right over the main door, there is a massive, stunning relief sculpture depicting the classical Chinese story of Diao Chan mesmerizing Dong Zhuo. It is a piece of architecture that tells the story of a man who refused to let a city lose its soul.
But as we've seen throughout this deep dive, nothing in North Point stays static for long.
No, it really doesn't.
The glamorous little Shanghai era with its elite theaters, classical concerts, and nightclubs was relatively brief. By the 1960s, the streets just outside Odell's theater were transforming yet again.
Now, as we look at this next era, I think it's really important to pause and just, note to you listening that the 1960s were intensely polarized.
Extreme.
And our goal today isn't to relitigate the Cold War politics of who was right or wrong or take sides. We are simply impartially reporting the history contained in the sources to explain how these massive geopolitical tensions physically reshaped the district.
Exactly.
Right.
We're not endorsing any political viewpoints. We're looking at this strictly through the lens of spatial and demographic evolution.
Right.
And that evolution in the 1960s was driven by a massive wave of Fujianese immigrants arriving in North Point. The high culture of Little Shanghai was gradually replaced, and the area transformed into a densely packed, working-class hub known as Little Fujian.
And the absolute epicenter of Little Fujian was, and still is, Chunyang Street. There's a great fun fact from the research here. The street was actually developed back in the 1920s by a wealthy Fujianese merchant named Kwok Chun-young.
Ah, so the geographical seed for a Fujianese community was planted decades before the massive migration actually
Yeah.
happened. When these new Fujianese immigrants arrived in the 60s, they often came with very little money. To survive, they relied heavily on incredibly tight-knit clan and kinship networks. They opened grocery stores, they established traditional medicine shops, and most importantly, they formed hometown associations.
Let's explain how these hometown associations actually worked, because they weren't just like casual social clubs where people drank tea, right?
Not at all. They were the absolute backbone of immigrant survival. If you arrived from Fujian and didn't speak Cantonese, the hometown association was your welfare system.
Wow.
They helped you find a bed, they acted as an employment agency to get you a job, and they provided loans. But because these community bonds were so tight and because they controlled the local economy of the street, these associations also became highly efficient political mobilization centers.
Which brings us to the 1967 riots. This was a period of intense, violent conflict in Hong Kong, heavily influenced by the Cultural Revolution happening in mainland China. Because of those strong, organized community networks on Chunyang Street, North Point became a major stronghold for left-wing groups.
And the colonial police heavily monitored the area. They were constantly raiding local Chinese medicine shops and massive residential blocks like the Q Kwan Mansion, actively searching for activists, weapons, and supplies.
The sources highlight how impossible it was to escape the politics if you lived there. They tell the story of a young man named Chen Jiangxiong who just worked in a local medicine shop.
Right, an ordinary guy.
Yeah. His everyday life was suddenly swept up in these macro-geopolitical clashes. He was arrested, not necessarily because he was a radical leader, but simply because his neighborhood, his workplace, and his clan network had become the front line of a Cold War proxy conflict.
So we have gone from a military front line in 1941 to a political front line in 1967. The neighborhood is literally built, layer by layer, on migration, survival, and struggle.
Which makes walking through Chunyang Street today such an incredible experience. It's not a war zone anymore. It is an absolute sensory overload of a market.
It is one of the most vibrant streets in the entire city.
It's famous for the ding-ding trams that literally slice directly through the middle of this bustling open-air market. Tourists flock there to take photos of the tram brushing past cabbage stalls.
But now that you know the history, you've got to look for the hidden gems.
Exactly. Listen to the vendors. Amidst the Cantonese, you will still hear the Hokkien dialect being spoken, and if you look closely at the narrow, dark stairwells of the old tenement buildings towering above the market stalls, you will see dozens of faded neon signs for various Fujianese hometown associations.
They are still there. The quiet legacy of an incredibly resilient immigrant fortress.
It really brings the entire narrative full circle. The physical landscape and the human landscape are deeply intertwined.
They really are.
Let's summarize this incredible double exposure photograph we've developed today. We started with a physical military fortress on a coastal hill, guarding an empire from the mud.
We saw the coastline, physically pushed outward to feed an industrial machine, permanently landlocking the European elite from their exclusive yacht club.
We watched a tap-dancing POW use the profits from blockbuster movies to build a world-class theater, feeding the souls of refugees.
And we saw the streets transform from the glitz of Little Shanghai to the politically charged, fiercely resilient immigrant networks of Little Fujian.
Every single one of these massive, era-defining stories happened within just a few square miles of each other.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
So to you listening, the next time you stand on Electric Road or gaze up at the concrete arches of the State Theater or dodge a tram plowing through the market on Chunyang Street, you now know you aren't just in a modern transit hub following a blue line on your phone.
Definitely not.
You are interacting with a century of deeply layered, intensely human history. You are walking through the three-dimensional chronicle we promised you.
Which leaves us with one final fascinating thought to mull over. If a single neighborhood's identity can completely overwrite itself every few decades, shifting from sea to land, from elite to public, from one distinct diaspora to another, what invisible historical layer is being written beneath your feet right now in the very city you call home that future historians will be uncovering a century from today?